Hello, friends, and welcome to part 6 of my 2021 year in review. It is the month of September. The fire season continues to rage out west, but in Salt Lake at the start of the month we got a little bit of rain, and it was at the first University of Utah football game of the year against Weber State. And we had a little rain delay and a beautiful rainbow. It was a double rainbow, but I only captured one. Also, Juan Diego had a big win over East. If anybody knows the difference between Juan Diego and East in Utah, you know that's a big win. Spent a lot of nights at football games and a lot of beautiful sunsets this year because the smoke just kept on coming all month long. This is up in Morgan, Utah. Again, a beautiful sunset and a beautiful evening for football. We didn't end up on the winning end of this one, though. And here's a night shot of the moon. But on my way up to watch the Morgan game, I drove by Echo Reservoir. And if people are familiar with Echo, it's on the way to Evanston, Wyoming. It's about 30 miles away from Evanston. It's usually pretty full of water. As you see, Utah's drought conditions, we're in a world of hurt here. This is, again, early September, and all this is usually full of water. And now it seems to be just a puddle. The flowers in the garden continue to put on beautiful blossoms in September, and I'm going to spend a little less time on flowers for this month, but sometimes when you get into the produce and there's so much harvesting and so much eating, you forget to stop and smell the flowers, and I didn't forget. I just didn't quite do it as often this month. The Rose of Sharon blooms are still going strong, and the roses are just dynamic this time of the year. And I'd like to take a look at some of the smaller flowers. I don't remember the name of this one, but it's pretty. Now look at the Asian pears. They're not quite ready to harvest totally, but they're getting close, and the tree is just way too loaded with fruit. And I had topped this one off and drastically pruned it a couple of years ago and did what I wanted it to do. Again, where you prune is where growth occurs, and we got lots of fruit clusters. But just way too many. So this next year I need to do a little more pruning and I need to thin the fruit. The fruit are plentiful, but they're small. They make excellent dried fruit, but they're a little too small just for eating. They're a little annoying, but it's an okay size fruit. Now looking at the full-size pear tree, I should say the full-size fruit on a pear tree, but this full-size fruit is small also. So for this year, the pears were a little bit undersized. They were good, not quite ready. I did sample a few toward the end of the month, and I picked most of them next month, but I did eat some this month. Here's how the pears look at the beginning of the month and at the end of the month. So they got quite a bit of ripening done and looking good. Again, a little bit smaller fruit, but they're still tasty. Took a nice bite out of this one, and it was ready. Now the apples on the tree, on the Espalier tree, are flushed, and I did pick a few to sample and wanted to make sure before I picked all of them, because this is the first year that I've had a decent harvest on this tree. And so this one was a great fruit and cut into it, and it ends up, I believe, being a John of Gold apple. But I decided they were about ready toward the end of the month. So here's a video of the Espalier, I keep mispronouncing it, apple tree. And you can see all the different fruit. There's about 50 fruit this year, so I was excited because I've only had just a handful of fruit on the various trees in my yard. Again, it took 7 or 8 years for this tree to finally produce a decent crop. Again, there was 50, but I think next year there could be many, many more. So I'm hoping that this tree is ready to take off and keep producing more and more fruit. But they're good. Espalier trees are great for long fence lines so you don't create shade. And as you see, the way I prune these trees, the fruit are really close to the main trunks and the really stronger stems. So there's a lot of support for the fruit, so you can have a heavier bearing crop without breaking things. And they're all trellis to wire, so it's a sturdy tree. We ate many of these apples fresh, but we also decided we'd dehydrate them in our little countertop dehydrator and put them in freezer bags and freeze them for a nice treat in the winter. But I am excited now that these trees are producing, and there was one other tree that actually produced quite a few fruit that was kind of a surprise. So I think we're going to be into fruit for a while. And here's another look at some of the ones I picked. I did pick them all except for a couple small ones that weren't ready. Now here's a harvest basket full. The rest of the fruit that's getting ready to be harvested is the grapes. They're doing well. Now taking a look at what's grown in my home garden in September is the kale. Is doing very well. My green beans are way behind. I grew pole beans and they're just now blossoming and starting to put on beans. The peppers are doing well in the earth boxes, getting different types of peppers and a good variety of spicy peppers, as well as green peppers. Earth boxes are great. They're not organic, but they do produce a lot of produce. There's a nice variety of green peppers. The tomatillos are starting to puff up a little, and the yellow squash is putting on a few. The yellow squash didn't do as good as the other squash this year. This is what happens when you miss a crookneck. This is what they turn into. And the banana squash are getting huge. And they change in color from a yellow to an orange, and they're kind of striped. I had two very large banana squash that just kept on growing. Not quite ready to pick yet. Buttercup squash is producing a lot of fruit, so we were able to eat some, and they're more of a dessert squash, very tasty, more sweet. Spaghetti squash, from the beginning of the month, the big ones were still growing and ripening, and by the end of the month, we picked them, and there were two really, really big spaghetti squash. All we did was have them and remove the seeds and put a lot of butter and bake them, and they were tasty. Also, the delicata squash are still producing regularly, and we still ate quite a few of those. I don't think any of them made it out of September. The Egyptian walking onion bulb tips had hit the ground, and they've already sprouted. So this is what happens. That's how they reproduce, and they walk, is they just move by putting their seed heads in new areas. Also in the month of September, I started harvesting potatoes out of my above ground containers. And these are very handy. It's easy to harvest. You don't cut any of the potatoes. You just open them up and just grab the potatoes. But what I found this year was my potato crop really wasn't very good in these. I'd filled them with a bunch of chicken compost that wasn't quite aged out yet, and I think I stunted some of the growth. I actually killed a couple of the containers just because they were too hot. But the plants looked good, but they didn't produce a lot of potatoes. Here's a look at kind of what I got out of these. Kind of small little potatoes. They're very tasty though. I mean, there's nothing wrong with these. They were very, very delicious, but just not big. My own home garden, my tomatoes weren't the greatest, but in September we were getting a consistent supply of tomatoes. And they're looking pretty good. They're no blossom end rot. They're well shapen, no bug problems. Now, also September, it's time to do a little bit of the cleanup of the chicken yard. So I did a lot of raking and moving stuff around. This is the makings of the next compost. I put down new hay for the yard, so they'll kick through that and spread it around. It also helps collect the manure and makes it a cleaner area. And I was starting to feed the chickens all the stuff that was overdue produce, all the tops, all the stuff that was spent. It was not quite the best. It all went to the chickens, and they enjoyed that. They ate a lot of the greens, and it makes really nice, rich eggs. In September, I took a look at my onions in storage, and they were looking like they were starting to soften up a little bit. So I decided I was going to freeze them. So all we do is we skin them, cut them up into smaller pieces, and there's no blanching with onions. You just put them in bags, and you just stick them in the freezer. So this makes for really easy preparation for meals just by pulling them out and dumping them out. I don't see praying mantis very often in my yard. I'm sure they're there. I just don't see them. And I found this friend at my front door, and I put him back in a tree so he could go on his way. And I only had a few grasshoppers this year. This is one of the only couple that I found this year, so it was a good year for not having grasshoppers. Now here is compost screening. I needed to have some compost to put in my raised bed for my garlic planting next year, and look at the problem I've got by having the compost in this area. All these roots, the tree roots and all the plants around it are just growing in the compost, and I thought it was a great idea to do this sunken compost bin, and it's working well. It's making compost, but it's becoming an issue with the amount of roots. So as you see here, I dug it all the way down, but I ended up with lots and lots of tree roots and bush roots, and got to figure this one out. And here's the compost that I made. You know, I had a mixture of some soil in there also, but pretty good stuff. I got almost a full garbage can, and there's lots of soil life in this. And I took this amount and I put it in my raised bed just to top it off as part of my concoction for my garlic, my fall planted overwintered garlic. And I just spread it around on top, and had a little garbage in here I had to get rid of, it looks like, but the stuff's good stuff. Transitioning to the project garden, tomatoes were plentiful in September. Lots and lots of tomatoes. And as you see, they're a little bit beat up. A little bit infrequent watering caused a few cracking issues, but really nice tomatoes. Also got some cabbage and some hot peppers. These are habanero peppers. I don't think I've shown them in many videos, but there was one plant of habaneros, and there was lots of them on there. So we'll use those also to make the dehydrated pepper flakes. Also in September, we still had lots of beans. So these are bush green beans that I'm picking here. And they started to slow down a little bit because I haven't been over here picking them. Again, you got to keep beans picked or they quit producing if you have mature beans on the plant. But cut them all up and they were tasty. And we froze some. Now we're into the turnips. And as you see here, there's lots of growth in the garden. Here's a close-up look at some of the turnips I pulled out of the ground. Left them in too long. They are a little bit bug damaged, a little cracked, and not the prettiest, but didn't affect their taste much. They were still good. Not a big turnip fan, as I've mentioned, but they're different, and it just gives you a little bit of variety in a diet. Also in September, I picked all the beets. I probably should have picked them a little sooner, but they were still tasty. They weren't woody. They were pretty perfect, actually. So got quite a few beets. I wish I would have planted a few more rows, but got a nice supply. And we boiled them, we peeled them, and as we cut them up, it looks like a crime scene. But some of them went in the freezer. And again, you got to prepare for winter, so we have a little variety in our diet then. Vegetable I got the most of to harvest the rest of the year are carrots. And so I started in September to get a good carrot harvest, and I just kept on pulling a few out here and pulling a few out there, and they're fine to be in the ground all summer. And some of them went to seed, but not too many of them. But here's a good look at the carrots. They were nice. Good close-up of some carrots. And I just took those home and we just peeled them. And we cut them up. And I gave all the peelings to the chickens. So here's a little bucket of what they got to eat. And then the potatoes. I started digging up the potatoes, and I did it in a couple different sections, but there's some big potatoes in here. So the project garden did much better than my home garden with potatoes. So I'm definitely a fan of growing in ground and having full sun. There's some really nice sized potatoes this year. And the smaller ones, I just cut them up and fry them in a little bit of oil, and makes great fried potatoes. They're very, very tasty. And here's a standard harvest, kind of what we did. I did a couple harvests only in September, and we got potatoes, and we got carrots and beets, and turnips, and beans, a couple cucumbers, a red cabbage, have some tomatoes there. You see a little bit of slug damage starting to happen, and we still have some ears of corn. They were getting to the end of their rope, though. But overall, again, it's what's for dinner in September. There's a lot of variety. Well, that does it for September. And here's the last of the harvest. Got lots of carrots, so that's what I'm going to be mostly about. But potatoes and a few hot peppers and lots of tomatoes still. And that's kind of what we end up going into October with. And I hope you like this video, and stay tuned for it'll be part 7 coming up.